Hello, and welcome to this episode of Central Valley Stories, Advertising and Public Relations. On this podcast, we talk history, trends, changes, and challenges with some of the region's veteran practitioners and agency owners. I'm your host, Professor Betsy Hays, in the Media, Communications, and Journalism Department at Fresno State. Enjoy! Today we have the wonderful pleasure of talking to Jan Edwards, longtime advertising, sales, and all things advertising and public relations professional, as well as former faculty in ad PR in the Media, Communications, and Journalism Department at Fresno State. Welcome, Jan.
Thank you so much, Betsy. This is an awesome project you're working on.
Thank you. It's been very fun and we're very excited. So let's provide our listeners with a little bit of context. Tell us about your career path. How did it all begin?
Well, I moved here from Atlanta, Georgia, and I had worked at the PBS station there in Atlanta. And I was the first camera woman there at the station. And then I wanted to move out west. I wanted to work in Los Angeles in television, but I got waylaid and started working on the media side, buying media rather than creating media content. Then I moved to Fresno and started working in advertising, and the rest all evolved.
So tell us a little bit about your time in advertising, television, radio, what stations and what kind of things were you involved in?
Well, I worked at an advertising agency, as I said. That's why I moved to Fresno. And so they had just picked up a big account called Gottschalk's Department Stores, which many of your listeners will probably be familiar with. And at the time they had 3 stores. I became their media buyer because I had worked at Western International Media in Los Angeles, which was the largest media buying entity in the world, actually, at that time. And so they also had General Electric, which was a huge thing for a small agency in the central San Joaquin Valley. And so I got a lot of experience working with regional and national clients as well as this local department store. But I noticed that everybody who came in to call on me when I was buying media were driving Vets, which were very big back then, and I was driving a Plymouth. So I thought maybe I'm on the wrong side of the desk. So I decided to go into the media sales end rather than the media buying end. I went and worked at Kino Radio, 13 Kino, which was the big bopper station at the time. It was a Drake Chenault station. They were very big into programming, and it was the station to sell. So I wanted to work for them. I was lucky enough to get the job, and then went on from there into television media.
And at some point, you also started teaching at Fresno State.
Right. Well, that was way later in my career, but I sold radio, and then I sold NBC and ABC television. And then I was invited back by the owner of the Gottschalk's department store there, Joe Levy, who some of your listeners will remember as well. And he had expanded this company, and I helped as well expand it into 6 states. And we had 59 stores. So I bought media throughout the United States in those major markets. And then I left Joe to go and open up my own shop. Then I got into the Central California Women's Conference, which was one of my greatest joys, working for women's rights. And then is when I started teaching. That's when I started teaching.
So the full circle story of the Gottschalk's bookends is, of course, fun to note, right? That when you started, there were 3 stores. And then when you left Gottschalk's the second time, it was at 59.
Right.
And that's a really significant milestone. And I'm sure everyone was incredibly proud of that.
Oh, we were. It was in the heyday of Gottschalk's, and they were the largest spender in the market, so everyone was kissing my ring, because they all wanted a piece of the budget. And I got to meet marvelous people. It was just phenomenal, the experiences of working with all of these people.
So before we start to talk about the teaching a little more, differences between selling television and radio, are there any differences? And what was maybe some of the fun things about both of those different channels?
Well, you're right. There are differences because sight, sound, motion, emotion is television. And so you have a picture and then you have the audio. And I was always in love with television. And so I had a real passion for it. Radio, I also loved, but not like television. So I think just research has shown that it is so powerful. The viewer is just captivated when you do your job correctly with your creative. And I think this is still true today on the internet, with YouTube, all of these things. things that when you have the video to go along with the audio. So, but I really enjoyed, I've sold everything, Betsy. I've sold tangible and intangible. Obviously, you're selling an intangible with television and radio, but sales is sales. It's all about relationship and deliverables.
So the campaign that I think was a marquee, or at least definitely a wonderful sparkling piece of your career in Gottschalk's, was the Gifts from Gottschalk's campaign. Can you talk a little bit about that? I'm sure many of our listeners remember that campaign.
Yes, this was kind of a pivotal moment in Gottschalk's history, because before we had been price item. And Mr. Levy and I went around and around about price item. I'm like, you've got to sell the magic. You're not buying lipstick, you're buying the magic that goes with the lipstick, And so he was very anti that, but he gave me the reins to do the Gifts from Gottschalk's campaign, and this went on to win Addy Awards, and we had phenomenal gains. It was back in 1999, I believe. We had phenomenal gains on our sales, and so the administration at the store realized, hey, maybe there's something to this, and it kind of changed and pivoted, and yes, I was very proud to be a part of that.
So the Central California Women's Conference, you started on the board and then ended up doing a tremendous amount of work for them. Talk a little bit more about the things that you did in conjunction with the Women's Conference.
Well, I was so lucky to serve for Gottschalk's on the board. Mr. Levy, again, he was my mentor. He opened many doors for me. So he knew I was passionate about women's rights. And so he said, all right, this is a natural fit. And Jack Moody as well. I got to give him props. And so we took this conference. We had a phenomenal board, and Mary Stablefeld, who was the director. And we took this conference that Ken Maddie started for women's rights in 1988. And we just built it to a huge and important women's event in the entire state of California. I think it's the number 3 or 4 largest event in the state. And so what I was lucky enough to do was handle the advertising and marketing, and then I also handled development. And they were both very important pieces of the puzzle. And, I'd go out and get AT&T to donate, whatever towards the event. And then we would work on getting the speakers. We got these great speakers like Goldie Hawn, Maria Shriver, all of these huge and wonderful names. And then we marketed it. And we took it from just a little homespun event to a very classy event, given the restrictions that we had.
So development, similarities, differences to traditional ad sales?
Well, development, because we are a 501c3, the Women's Conference is, and so it is handled differently in that you do have deliverables for your client, but it's not hardcore ratings, spots and dots, that sort of thing. So you measure your success a little bit differently, and many people just do it as a part of their budget. For example, the financial industry, they have to donate X amount of money back into the community. So we would go to folks like that and just tell them what we do for the community. We're very big in research. And so we would ask our customers, our attendees, what they needed. What do you like? This and that. So we knew what we were doing, and we did many things for the community. We created scholarships, and we had speakers who really made a difference in these attendees' lives. So it was quite lovely the way it all came together.
So tell us about something early in your career that you are proud of. Talk about a fun early win.
I think back in the day, women really were just starting out. And so one thing I'm very proud of is I was fortunate enough to have my 3rd child when I was 40 years old. And I went and got my master's degree. KC24 allowed us, they would pay for our future education. So I took advantage of that, and I advise anyone listening to this to do that. And so I was blessed enough, my husband and I were having this 3rd baby. So I wanted to work a thing called flex time. Back in the day, you were working your 8 to 5 or whatever. Flex time was not a thing like it is now, where everybody works, hybrid online or in person after COVID. Back then, this was like you'd get laughed out of the room. Well, I pitched my managers at Casey, which was owned by Meredith Corporation, and I went up the food chain to try to allow me to work from home as well as from the office. Well, I struck out there. But when I got the call from Joe Levy asking me to come and run his shop, I said, okay, this is how I'm going to have to do it. I just have this baby. I want to be working out of my home part of the time and out of the office. So I did that. I was a pioneer in many things, but I was a pioneer in that too. And I really am proud of that I stood up for what I wanted, because I believe in hard work and delivering. But I don't think, it doesn't matter where you are. You could be on Mars as long as you're delivering the product.
Absolutely. Thank you. So how have things evolved in advertising since you started your career to now? What changes have you seen?
Oh, dramatic changes, but then everything is still the same. It's very interesting. So I think back in the day when I first started, Betsy, there were 3 television stations, NBC, ABC, and CBS. And then, of course, Fox came on board. And then Ted Turner, of course, started cable out of Atlanta, Georgia, CNN, TNT, and all of those. So anyway, your product, you had more product to sell. And research was always key, but it certainly wasn't like it is today. The financial industry, everything now, you're to the second, to the megasecond of what your financial situation is. And now in all advertising, you know exactly where you are financially. So I feel that gives a lot more. Folks have to really deliver more. I think more is expected because you can measure it down to the dot and you can measure your results down to the dot. But again, advertising is not an exact science. If everybody had the exact answer, we'd all be rich on Wall Street. So I think that has been a significant difference. I think relationship, in my mind's eye, as being a sales trainer all these years after doing sales, it's still about relationship. However, I think relationships perhaps don't have the same depth as they did have because many of your customers, in Hong Kong or whatever, you probably will never meet them in person. So relationships are built online now, and that's a good thing, but it is different. That there's something about chemistry. There's something about the synapses that are released when you look in someone's eye or you touch, shaking a hand. So I think that's different. Now, that might sound kind of funny, but that to me is like the main difference that I've seen.
So let's pivot to talk a little bit about the teaching side of things. You taught at Fresno State for almost 20 years, a variety of courses. Can you talk about what you taught and what that was like?
Teaching, I thought I was in love before, but I fell in love again when I started teaching. I got into teaching for all the wrong reasons, but it ended up being all the right reasons. When I first started teaching, I will never forget, and students will get this. I remember one of my first classes, a student raised their hand and said, "Well, do you use Blackboard?" And I kind of fell into this, and I'm like, do I use the Blackboard? Well, yeah, I use the Blackboard. Well, little did I know, Blackboard was a tool that we use here on campus, electronic tool that we use. So, just funny. I came into teaching like I had taught high school a little bit, but I came into teaching and I just was thrown in 5 different classes, 5 different new preps, crazyville, but I just mustered through. And, I'll never forget my reviews that first semester were worst teacher I've ever had. And then some were like the best teacher I've ever had. So I thought, okay, there's hope. And I just worked at it really hard for 19 years. And it brought me such joy and satisfaction because I was able to impart my experience and where the pitfalls were that I experienced and then where the mountains were, the vista from above, and watch these students soar. And it's been such a joy.
That's one of the best parts of our job.
You got it.
Without question. So one of the core classes that you taught for MCJ was advertising sales.
Yes.
And I know that work in conjunction with the Collegian was something very important to you and something that, you were also able to build a program. So if you could share a little bit about that.
Yes, I had a great mentor over here in Virginia, Sellers Laban, who was our general manager. And then, of course, Roberta Asahina, who had started the course, Dr. A. And so I was able to take it a step further because I had been doing sales for years and years and years. And I think I was able to let the students know, hey, this is going to be a dry run of what you're going to be doing when you graduate from fabulous Fresno State. And this is going to give you an opportunity to work with real people with real money and develop real relationships that if you're lucky and you're smart and you work hard, you will be able to call these folks friends at the end of the semester and they might hire you. Who knows? So we really took it seriously, and our students year in and year out worked so hard and they learned. Sales is an art, and they learned how to present themselves, and then they learned how to present our great product that our journalists prepared for us day in and day out.
And several of the students who excelled in that course went on to careers in advertising sales. Is that correct?
That is correct. We've had many superstars out in there, and some around the globe, actually. And, I'm thinking Hong Kong right now or China. There are some folks there. But even in this market, we've had folks, and then, of course, we've had folk who have graduated and who have now worked. They get hired right out of school. They got hired right out of school at major television stations, major markets. So that was just lovely.
And another course that you really had an impact on was the Public Relations Campaigns course, the capstone course for the PR students. And two particular programs came out of your work there, the Hall of Fame, and then TASTE, which is an acronym for Take a Student to Eat, which I think our listeners would agree is one of the best all-time names for an event. So first, let's talk about the Hall of Fame and talk us through that evolution, which of course also weaves into your work with the alumni chapter.
Yes. So the Hall of Fame event, my father was a big wig back in the South. He was sports editor of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And so he was honored by the University of Georgia, my alma mater, the other Bulldogs. And so there was a program called the Fellows and the Hall of Fame. And I thought, wow, wouldn't this be great if we brought this to our department, the Media Communications and Journalism. And so, because we've had so many fabulous graduates out of our college, out of our sequence. And so we just put it together. This became our project for each semester, or every other semester. The students would work on creating a Hall of Fame event where we would go and we would honor incredible folks who have contributed to our industry, our fine industry. And then we developed a second part of that program called the Fellows, which I believe you are one, Professor Hays. And these are folks who are still in the trenches with their career and doing great things. And we brought these folks back on campus. The students created the event. We raised money for our scholarships that we support, the MCJ Alumni and Friends chapter. And it just came together as just a beautiful, fun homecoming, if you will, for these graduates coming back on campus, our alumni. And then, for our students, a once-in-a-lifetime career for them to create an event like this.
And, lifetime relationships, right? With the networking. And
yes.
I know that there are students who met some alums through that program that are in touch, decade and a half later.
Exactly, right? It's just awesome.
And then TASTE, Take a Student to Eat. Let's talk about that a little bit.
So this is very funny how this started, and it's kind of a funny story, but I'm going to share it anyway. We had done an event, my campaigns class had done an event, and sometimes when you're a professor, you have a thing called the slacker factor, and there are students in a class who don't really participate, and they ride on the coattails. Not that any of our listeners would have ever done that, but some folks might have done that. So I was kind of upset at the end of the semester that some of these students hadn't done anything. So I said, all right, you guys, you're going to do a second event because you didn't participate in the first. And I was reading and I found out about an event from back east at one of the Ivy League schools, and they did a thing called TASTE. But we changed our model to match our students' affinities, what they wanted to study with an expert in the field. So, for example, we would get, if you wanted to be a radio jockey, we would put you with somebody who was on the air, a DJ. So we did that, and the kids really started loving it because they got to meet these great industry leaders and sort of interview, and then we got kids hired right out of school with that too. It was phenomenal just from the time they spent with them at the luncheon and then sort of pitching themselves, and then folks were impressed and they hired them. And it was so lovely, and it's still going on today. I'm so happy you're continuing that.
And there was even a couple of virtual TASTE experiences, right, due to the pandemic, and that was a whole nother.
That was my last TASTE before I went on to my next chapter. And this TASTE event was so amazing, Bets, because it was around the world. We had alumni there from across the globe. We did it all virtually, and it was phenomenal. And we raised money. We raised money, too.
Yes, you did. No, it was definitely one of the bright spots of the pandemic for sure. And so the students are, matched up with someone who's doing their potential career. There's the shadowing, there's the luncheon, and it just continues to be one of the students' favorite things. So that's wonderful. Let's talk. We mentioned technology just for a second there when we talked about the virtual TASTE, but let's talk about technology and how it has impacted your career.
I think technology is a wonderful and frightening thing in the same sentence. I really feel, and you and I have had philosophical discussions about this, I think the strength of it, the good part of it, is that you can go to school, you go to college, you can do it all virtually. I'm kind of a fan of hybrid. I kind of like doing it virtually, but also being in person. Because again, that chemical thing, like I shared earlier, it's a real deal. And so I think technology certainly is here to stay. It's not going away, but I hope it will never replace an in-person relationship as well.
there's kind of a little bit of a theme, right, in our conversation about there's definite significant change during the course of your career, but then there's some things that remain constant and will hopefully, right, never change. So let's talk about that for a second. In the advertising industry, what are, the core elements that were essential when you started, essential when you're teaching, continue to be essential, and it doesn't matter whether folks are tweeting about it or Xing about it or, creating a video or giving a speech?
Yeah. To me, Betsy, the main thing is you have to listen. You have to give their customer what they want. You have to find out what are your needs. What can I do for you? What do you need? And then, of course, this translates into the relationship. Once somebody is more comfortable with you, they trust you, they're going to tell you a little bit more intimately what their needs are and to giving you important facts about what they need. And then you get to decide and figure out, okay, well, which mediums are going to best reach your target audiences? What creative is going to resonate? And how are we going to determine if this has been successful? And it's really basic. It's been that way since I started back in, 1974. That's still what goes on today. But of course, there are so many more nuances and layers and sophistication. But it's still basically the same. You have a need. I need to determine what your need is. And let me help you figure out how you get to where you want to go with your product or your message.
Very similar to the conversation we had a minute ago about fundraising and development.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah, making those matches.
Yes, it's all about that.
Let's talk again about some things that you were proud of. Share one or two more.
Oh, wow. I'm so proud that, as I said, when I started back working in 1974, I graduated in 73, 1974, I was always sort of a pioneer. I was the first woman camera person. I remember lugging those big cameras up in the gym at Georgia at the basketball games. Then I was one of the first women on the sales force, and that was amazingly wonderful. And then I was one of the first in production, because women didn't work so much in production, but I loved production. So I was able to do that and produce. I'm also very proud of all the work we did at Gottschalk's. I was able to work with Fox 26 and KC24, which had not been heard of then. This is in the heyday of Pappas, Harry Pappas. And he had an incredible production team. And 24, we spent a majority of our money with ABC 30, 24. And I was able to work that deal with ABC 30, it was ABC 30 and Fox 26 to work together. So that was a collaborative effort, one of the first. And then I was happy to see other women start coming on board and to support them. And that was amazing too. And then again, I'm very proud of the difference we made in people's lives with the Women's Conference, because it truly did change some women's lives. And I got much feedback to that, folks saying that. So that was very rewarding. And then I think teaching, as I said, just watching the students soar and learn and grow has been so lovely. I've always wanted to be a lifelong learner, and I believe I am, and now I've pivoted to still yet a new frontier. And it's not an easy one, but it's something that I wanted to do years ago in college, and I fell into the media side of things. I'm getting back into the creative, and I'm writing some screenplays right now, and then I am working on a book as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. You had mentioned the feedback from the women at the Women's Conference that it had changed their lives, and obviously a huge, marker of success with that event. The other marker, of course, is the consistency in the sponsors, because you had folks coming back year after year after year. Obviously, their needs were met. If you want to talk about that piece of it.
Yes, that was quite lovely because, there's an 80-20 rule in sales, and 80% of your budget is going to come from 20% of your clients. So we were very lucky in that once I could convince folks to come on board and sponsor the CCWC, then I knew they would probably not come back. I mean, we had a very high return rate. And so I think probably one of my legacies would be that we built our core customer, and the conference has been very successful, both creatively and fiscally. It's sound, in good shape. And so when I passed the torch to my predecessor, they were in good shape. And that's what I think you always want to do. You want to find a place better than you found it, and then you want to lift it up as you walk out that door.
So one additional piece on the conference is the grant money.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that, because that's part of the fiscal soundness, is that the conference had the fund to provide some grants to folks.
Oh my gosh, yes. Thanks for bringing that up. Yes. Every year we've given money back to our community. And I believe last year we gave, do you remember, it was like 50 or some huge number. Yeah. Was it 150? It
was a lot.
It was a lot. Now, think of all the nonprofits, community benefit organizations in our valley, and they all have a need, and they do such remarkable work. And so one of our missions at the Women's Conference was not only to put together a great one-day event, but to give money back to our community for women's causes primarily. And so all of this money that we raised, we were able then to give back to help our community, because, you know, the need is huge in this valley. We have a very huge need. There's much poverty here. So we really lift up the community as well and give back all this money. So, of course, I'm very, very, very proud of that as well. Thank you for reminding me on that.
So if someone were thinking about going from a successful career in advertising and public relations and sharing that wisdom in the classroom, what tips would you give them? That's not an easy transition. Maybe it is an easy transition. Well, I don't know. Everybody has their different perspective, but I'm curious about your perspective and then also advice.
Well, the first thing I would say is check your ego at the door, because I came over from corporate America and was lucky enough to be quite successful. So then I started teaching, and I was like a lecturer and not a PhD. So, you know, the status system, you know, the structure. And I was a beginner. I was learning. I was a newbie. So I couldn't live on my past laurels. And so that is what I would say. If you're going to endeavor into a new career, you have to know you're starting over. And so you have to be humble, and you have to realize you're learning, and you have to be patient with yourself. And not forget, though, your experience and how much you really know and that you can share with your students. And so, yeah, it was a curveball. I didn't expect it to be quite as arduous a climb as it was, but I enjoyed the climb most of the days. And again, the heights at the top of the mountain were so worth it. So I would say stick to it.
What about someone who was like a student considering a career in advertising and public relations? What advice would you give someone just embarking on the journey?
I would say work hard. I think work ethic is something that cannot be taught. You either have it or you don't. I would say work smarter too, not necessarily work harder, because research, I mean, it's at your fingertips now. There's no reason for not being versed in whatever industry it is you want to work at or in. So I think information is power. So you must really be a student of wherever you want to work, and then go into it with open arms. People are basically kind and are going to help you and lift you up. So just know that it's going to be okay. Just stick with it, work hard, make friends. This is such a lovely part of life. In work, you build so many relationships. And you've all heard it's not what you know, it's who you know. Well, I personally think it's both, but it's so joyful because the friends you're going to make, you know, you've heard you have deal friends and you have real friends. Well, in your career, you'll have both, and they're all okay.
A couple of follow-ups to that. Let's talk a little bit more about research, because from the moment that we met, I have never had a conversation with you about a campaign or a project or a class without the topic of research coming up. It's something that you talk about all the time, both in your professional career and with your students. I'm wondering if you can just share a little bit more about the importance and scope and other things about research.
Yeah, I think research is key. Again, it goes back to just a relationship. Let's go to the movies, Betsy. Well, what movie do you want to see? Well, what movie do I want to see? Well, why? You know, just talking back and forth. So research is really just a much more in-depth, deep dive into finding out everything you can about the particular issue at hand. If it's a radio campaign or a social media campaign or a television or, you know, whatever, you just need to dive in deep to find out what all your beautiful options are on where you want to place your money to get to your end goal. And you've got to have clearly defined measurables that you're shooting for. And truly, if you take the time to really get into it, it's a piece of cake, you know? So many people are trying to cut corners or whatever. Well, no, you can't. You need to know everything you can know about that product, everything you can know about this whole process that you're working on. Information is power.
And the pre and post survey component, right, of an event. I know that is definitely one of the hallmarks of your career, is that there are folks who didn't have any of that type of research before you got involved. And now, of course, that's part of the fundamental fabric of the event or program or whatever. Can you talk a little bit about why that is worth the time?
Absolutely. It's funny you say that. You're making me have memories. When I walked into my job as the Godchalk's media director, there was one Nielsen rating book for the market of Fresno, California. That was it. There was no research, nothing on these markets, nothing. So I got to build all of my research data. And it took a while, but I had to be a fast learner. I mean, quickly. But it helped us grow in television. Mr. Levy was a big believer in television advertising and relationship advertising. And so he was my mentor in learning how to build the relationships to spend the money. And it was very successful. And I've lived by that throughout my career, and it's worked very well. Pre and post, like you're talking about with a conference, for example. And it was so lovely. We just went to the conference here recently, and now you can do the post research on your phone. Well, back in the day when I started it, we had to have papers on the table, surveys. People had to fill them out. We had to give them a door prize to do it. We had to input everything on an Excel spreadsheet, thousands of responses. It was so arduous. And now you can just do it, with a click of a button. And so it's quite lovely. But the point is, the results are the same. And that is what you're going to base now. For example, the results of this past conference, then the folks who are in development are going to know which way to go, what clients to go after, that sort of thing, who can use the deliverables that the conference has. Research is queen.
So another hallmark component of your career is the lifelong learning aspect. And you touched on it very briefly, but I do want to go back to that because I have observed that myself in our almost 20-year friendship, is that you never shy away from learning something new. And it's remarkable, I must say, because there have been times when personally I'm thinking I am too tired to learn something else. And you always come back with, we need to do this. We need to explore this. We need to learn this. And I feel like it's not only, this is my hypothesis, that it's not only a professional strategy for you, it's also a personal value. Is that true?
I think it is true, Betsy. My grandmother was born in 1898 and she got her degree. Women didn't go to college back then, She got her degree, and then my mother had to go back to school and get her degree. And it was just instilled in me, if you're not learning, you're aging. And so I think you're only as old as your last new piece of information that you've learned. Mm-hmm. It's rather exciting, I think, to keep learning and growing.
I love that. Thank you. We were visiting with Dr. Roberta Asahina for the last episode, and we talked a little bit about her memory and being able to determine, Marvin was on the Toyota campaign in whatever year. So similar to that, one thing I've observed about you is your very uncanny, again, we'll use the word remarkable, ability to remember very specific details about people when you're circling back with conversations. So, for example, you see someone, and whether it has been a day, a week, a month, 6 months, there's always a personal detail that you mention. Is the cat better? Or how was your son's graduation? Or did the house get painted? Or, those sorts of things, which has always been incredibly impressive to me. And again, maybe that's also both a professional strategy and a personal value. But I'd love, first of all, if you want to share your secret, all of us listeners would love to know that. But talk about that a little bit, because that's definitely, again, one of your pixie dust items.
Well, thank you, Betsy. I just love people. I've always been inquisitive. I've always been curious, and I just enjoy talking with people and seeing what's inside their head, what their lives are like. So some folks might think it's just, a sales technique, but no, I think it's more of just part of my fabric, that I'm just interested in people. And I think one of my favorite quotes is, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I really believe that, Harvey Mackay. I truly believe that. And I think that if I know you have my back, I'm going to have your back. And I think that makes life really lovely.
So as we start to wrap up, is there anything else that you would like to add about your career or advice or anything else?
Well, I think career-wise, for advertising PR, it's been such a lovely, lovely career. I couldn't have asked for a more fun, a more lucrative, a more exciting and changing career, because every day I would go to work, something new was happening, something different was happening. It was never boring. I never was bored. And I suggest to anyone, if you're bored in your job, your career, you need to pivot, because there's so many more exciting things out there for you. So don't get in a rut. If you don't like what you're doing, there's going to be something else that you're going to love. You just have to open yourself up to finding out what that is. So I would say, don't be afraid to fail. I'm just reading Oprah's new book, Oprah and Arthur Abbott's new book. And Arthur Abbott says that keeping a failure journal is just as important as keeping a successful things that have gone well journal, because you learn from your failures and that opens you up to now success. So don't be so hard on yourself. Go gentle on the world. It will all work out.
What a perfect bow. Thank you. We have been so happy to be visiting today with Jan Edwards. And Jan, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you, Betsy Hays, the new Tim Ferriss. Love it. Thank you.
Take care, listeners. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Central Valley Stories, Advertising and Public Relations. Join us again next time as we talk history, trends, changes, and challenges with more of the region's veteran practitioners and agency owners. Until then, take care and be well.